Channel 2, English.
Good morning, dear colleagues. Can I please ask you to take your seats? Dear colleagues, can I ask you to take your seats? Madame la Première Ministre.
Madam Prime Minister, Misters Prime Ministers, Commissioners, Speakers of National Parliaments.
Here, in Strasbourg, Paul-Henri Spaak presided over the opening of the first ever session of the Common Assembly of the European Coal and Steel Community. It was the starting point of this institution's plenary activity. In 70 years, the Assembly grew from strength to strength. In 1962, it changed the name to become the European Parliament. In 1973, it opened its first own institutional hemicycle in Luxembourg, where many of our staff members sit. Over time, parliamentary committees and political groups' activity grew in Brussels as increased powers came with the responsibility of exercising increased scrutiny over the other European Union institutions. This institution embodies European reconciliation. It matters that we are here in Alsace today as a living symbol of how far we have come. Symbolism is important, but this House is so much more. Over the years, consecutive treaties have allowed our House of Democracy to develop into a powerful, independent political forum with co-legislative and budgetary powers that impact millions of European citizens, that protects the best interests of citizens, that reflects and amplifies the voice of 500 million people. Today, the European Parliament has become the only directly elected, multilingual, multi-party, transnational parliament in the world. Its 705 directly elected members are the expression of European public opinion. With an ongoing illegal war in Ukraine that destroys, kills and undermines the political will of a people, we are reminded again of the importance of upholding the democratic values and voice of citizens and the democratic European values that this House stands for. And that is why it is important that we mark the European Parliament's 70th anniversary. It is important that we pause to reflect on our achievements. The achievement of getting Europeans to seek and find compromise and to come together to adopt a common agenda for the benefit of all. The achievement of making our shared space a little bit safer, a little bit fairer, a little bit more equal. The achievement of creating a union of rights, of values, of solidarity, of equality, of peace, of hope. From the ashes of war, we have found the wisdom, the courage and the humanity to choose to stand together, to tear down walls and unite people and nations. Together, we can continue our mission to tackle generational inequalities, to fight crippling poverty, to keep us safer and ensure our security, to ensure equality of opportunity, to fight discrimination, to stand up for women, to show our LGBTIQ community that this truly is a freedom zone, to create a framework for prosperity and economic growth, to beat climate change, to help create jobs, to ensure dignity to all. I am not here to say that we are perfect. We are not. Our peace and our processes sometimes frustrate. Progress is not always fast enough or deep enough or easy enough. We must keep reforming, we must keep pushing for positive change, day in and day out. But I am proud of our achievements, of our way, of Europe being a beacon of the defence of democracy, of the way that we have never been indifferent, of how we have never looked away. Friends, Europe is the answer to so many of the questions our people ask of us. It is a way of life and a way of living. It was no coincidence that the EU flag was raised over Kherson after so many months of brutal occupation. It is because it symbolises hope, courage and belief. This is the legacy of our Europe, the legacy of this House, the legacy of the last 70 years. C'est à ce titre que les membres de ce Parlement dont
It's along these lines that the European Parliament comes to vote democratically every month in Strasbourg, and it's in favour of human rights that the European Parliament is constantly working to defend their needs, and it is for the needs of our European citizens that we fight. Citizens that are impacted by inflation and by the increase in cost of living, and we will continue to rise to the challenges together.
I invite you to watch a video clip prepared for the 70th anniversary of the European Parliament. Thank you.
L'Europe ne se fera pas d'un coup. Elle se fera par des réalisations concrètes, créant d'abord une solidarité de fait.
C'est un très grand honneur que vous m'avez fait en m'appelant à la présidence du Parlement européen.
We thank you that by your ceaseless efforts and those of the millions of people you represent, you liberated from prison so many of us.
Ce peuple européen uni n'accepteront pas la domination d'une nation ou d'une culture sur d'autres, mais soutiendront les droits égaux pour tout enrichir les autres de leurs différences.
Aufbau des vereinten Europas ist vor allem anderen ein Werk des Friedens. Und dies müssen wir gemeinsam schaffen.
Le nationalisme, c'est la guerre.
Союз буде точно міцніший. Без вас Україна буде самотньою.
Thank you very much. I will now invite the Prime Minister of Belgium, Alexander De Croo, to take the floor.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, today's Europe is not necessarily pushed forward by visionary leaders like the ones we know from our history books. Schuman, Spinelli, Spaak. Today, Europe's political project is mainly driven forward by visionary citizens, by the people of Europe. And that is not abnormal. We do not live anymore in the 1950s. People today are empowered. They're more demanding towards those who are in positions of leadership. And that, all in all, is a healthy evolution. Because free and autonomous citizens, together with a free and independent press, are the core of our democracy. They are the guarantee of strong democratic accountability. We have felt that public pressure during the COVID crisis. While politicians tended to point out that from an institutional point of view, healthcare was a national competency, and that vaccines were none of Europe's business. It was the public opinion. It were the people of Europe who paved the way for a European response to the pandemic. As President von der Leyen coined very candidly, this is Europe's moment. And we see now exactly the same happening in this energy crisis. It is Europeans that see that the energy markets are international, not national. That energy prices are being used as a geopolitical weapon, that individual member states hit the limits of what they can do on their own, but that Europe should not be impotent, that our sovereignty, our ability to act, is not only on the national level, but it is on the European level. And you know, that insight is not new to European citizens. It was already the case before the energy crisis broke out. In 2019, 90% of Europeans thought it was also Europe's task to guarantee the security of energy supply and to keep the energy prices under control. Ladies and gentlemen, this House probably captures best the impatience of our population. Because you know from experience, what it is to fight long and hard for your rightful place in the Union. The European Parliament has always been the first institution, in the formal sense. First in the treaties and first in the protocol. But for a long time, it was not first in policy making. In the words of Professor David Farrell, for much of its life, the European Parliament could have been labelled as a multilingual talking shop. But today, it is one of the most powerful legislators in the world. Today, we Europeans, we can be proud of the road that we have travelled together. Mesdames et messieurs,
Ladies and gentlemen, Madam President, having said that, our job of work is far from having been completed. Democracy is a task which is forever incomplete. If we genuinely want to bolster our democracy, we have to make sure that we also bolster this European Parliament. All the major challenges...
Ça aurait été bizarre de pas avoir...
It's strange if we didn't get applause at that point in the speech, but all of the major challenges, regardless if it be the war in Ukraine, migratory flows, energy prices. All of these challenges are at stake at the international level. So we have to reinforce and bolster our democracy at that same international level and at our European level. Because the world is changing and we have to change with it. We often tell people this, to our electors, for example, it is time for change. But perhaps we should more often say these things to ourselves. There are many countries at the eastern borders of Europe, the Western Balkans, for example, but also Ukraine and Moldova, who see their future in our family. And this new reality has to push us to change our points of reference. It will force us to take new steps in European democracy so that in the years and decades in the future, we'll have more decisive action and better protect the European interests throughout the world. And we count on this Parliament to play that role. We will continue to link up Brussels and European citizens. Regardless of the path we choose to take, the European Parliament inevitably will take a new leap forward in becoming genuinely the first institution of Europe.
Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, I am optimistic about the future. As you said, our European democracy is far from perfect. It needs continuous improvement. But it is not the delicate plant we thought it to be over the past couple of years. Our democracy is more resilient than we sometimes think. And this Parliament is actually the best proof of that. I would like to honour the fundamental work this Parliament has done in protecting democracy and the rule of law in Europe. We cannot leave this fight for fundamental rights to the courts only. We politicians also have to do our part of the heavy lifting. And as a member of the European Council, I applaud the persistence of this Parliament and the frontrunner role that this Parliament has played in this domain. We need you. We need your support to be a vigilant watchdog in that domain. Still more has to be done together with you. From the European Green Deal to European to energy security and transition to migration reform. We still have 18 months left before the end of this mandate. The Belgian Council presidency that we will have in 2024 will stand ready to engage with you to successfully close the chapter of this legislature. Let me be clear, you are a key partner to us, day in, day out. You are part and parcel of the European fabric, and you are also part and parcel of the fabric of my country. And so I would like to say simply thank you to the Parliament. Thank you to the Parliament and its leadership, with a special mention of the late President Sassoli. Thank you for the solidarity it has shown with the people of Brussels during the COVID crisis and with the Ukrainian refugees during this crisis. Madam President, ladies and gentlemen, let me finish by saying this House represents the catharsis of a long history of violence between European countries. This Parliament represents the victory of humanity over nationalism. It represents the best in us Europeans. It is the Parliament of parliaments. And so we look forward to a year of celebrations with European citizens, but we especially look forward to a year of continuing work together with you. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Prime Minister De Croo. I now invite the Prime Minister of Luxembourg, Xavier Bettel, to take the floor. Xavier, you have the floor.
Madame la Présidente,
Madam President, Madam Prime Minister, Mr. Prime Minister, the film that you showed us brings back some good memories, some memories of when I was younger, people I was lucky enough to work with, such as President Sassoli. these are people that, to me, represent Europe, such as the first woman president, Simone Veil. I have a speech, an institutional speech. I will give you a copy, of course, with all the thanks that are in that speech. But actually, after this film, I want to say something else. So, of course, a very happy 70th anniversary. Prime Minister de Croo has talked about bringing the citizens closer to Europe, and I'm sure Prime Minister de Borne will say similar things when it comes to Strasbourg. But I think each capital and each citizen needs to be brought closer to this European project, we all know. I would like to thank the Secretary General based in Luxembourg. I think we have very good relations, and we will, of course, continue to do everything we can for these people who we wouldn't be able to do our work without. But I'd like to come back to Simone Veil. Here we are in an assembly that was created in 1952, so before the Treaty of Rome, 7 years earlier. France and Europe, France and Germany, sorry, that had previously been at war, the war that had ended in 1945. 7 years later, there was a decision to build something together in a parliamentary assembly to create something different rather than destroy each other, to create something together. Now, why do I think Simone Veil is such an important symbol? She was a survivor of the concentration camps. So we had these concentration camps on European territory. This was the result of an extreme nationalism, the darkest ideology we knew in Europe, Nazism. And even now, in some European countries, people act as if this nationalism is a solution to problems. There are people that are Holocaust deniers still, while Simone Veil was able to tell people what she had personally experienced during the Second World War.
Et je crois que le chancelier Kohl.
I believe that Chancellor Kohl spoke well when he said this is a project of peace. Peace. Our European Union, since 1952, since 1957, there has been no conflict between our countries. Now, of course, it's not always easy, but we have not had armed conflict as we had before. Let us not forget that on our own territory, a number of us would not have had the right to live because they were trade unionists, because they were too left, because they were homosexual, because they were disabled, simply because they were different. Today, we live in a territory. You are elected by citizens who can freely vote. This European Parliament has such an important responsibility. You are there to remind us of those values. Now, I'm certainly not casting aspersions here. We speak out about what happens in other parts of the world, but also within our European family, it is important to recall our values, our rules, our fundamental guidelines. I could speak of numerous different rights. There was progress in Malta yesterday when it came to women's rights. But today there are journalists, there are judges who cannot freely exercise their professions within the EU. We have stigmatization of sexual minorities, which is not acceptable. So I think it's hugely important that the Parliament always recalls us of this, and that this conditionality is always part of the decisions that we make. Now, we believe that peace is something that we have, that these rights are something that we have. And I have spoken about the Second World War. I have made this comparison, but I'm very proud to see that there are so many young people here today You are the European project. I would not have had the right to live in that period in the Second World War. I was liberal. I had Jewish origins, being married to a man. Now, Belgium, that's not related, but being homosexual, being liberal, being gay, that would have meant that I would have been condemned 3 times over. And here I am today, a head of state. That is the European project. You might be different. You might have different origins, but this richness is not something which limits us. That is where our richness lies, in this diversity. We should not allow this to be destroyed. So we are here celebrating the 70th anniversary of the European Parliament. We need to keep this diversity, which is our strength. We should not be divided, whether it's in Council, Commission or Parliament. I would like to thank the President of the European Commission and the members of the European Commission who remind us of the obligations that we have set ourselves. Europe is not just about receiving, it is also giving, building something bigger together. So do not forget that. And a very happy anniversary to Parliament. And we will continue to count on Parliament to remind us of these values. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Merci. Merci, Monsieur le Premier Ministre.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister.
of France, Elizabeth Borne. You have the floor.
Madam President of the European Parliament, Madam President of the European Commission, Prime Ministers, ladies and gentlemen, speakers of the national parliaments, ladies and gentlemen, commissioners, honorable members, ladies and gentlemen. For 70 years now, France has had the honor and the pride to host here in Strasbourg the center of democratic life of our union, the European Parliament. 70 years. An institution that was born in the aftermath of the war and in the early hours of a Europe desired to ensure peace, had a very quick intuition of a need for dialogue and political construction, an institution that has been marked by its men and women, its women and its men. Robert Schuman, amongst the founding fathers, Simone Veil, the first women president of the European Parliament, David Sassoli, this great European who left us in the early 2022. And it is you, all of you, the elected representatives of the European citizens, that bear its voice and its aspirations. 70 years, this is therefore an occasion to go back over our history. A path characterized by essential conquests. First, the members of the parliament were appointed by the national parliament, and then there was universal suffrage and direct elections that were decided in 1976, and the first elections were held in 1979. Since that very time, for 40 years now, you have become not just European representatives, but representatives of the European citizens. You represent them directly. Then there was a conquest of broader remit. Since the very beginning, the Parliament had a role of supervision and then little by little has continued to increase its powers with every revision of the treaty, with further scrutiny, and all the way up through the Treaty of Lisbon in 2009 that consecrated co-decision as ordinary legislative procedure. All of this is a boon, of course, to the European Parliament, but also to Europe as a whole. Because each time the European Parliament increases its powers, Europe gains in democracy. Now, this democracy is a democracy that we will never fail to defend. At a time when some will assault Ukraine, at a time when authoritarian regimes would like democracy to be considered weak, we must be proud of our democracy, proud of our values, because we shan't forget that where authoritarian regimes where some would invade Ukraine, we understand very well that by invading Ukraine, Russia is attacking democracy and human rights, the very foundation of what we gather here to defend. And since the very beginning, the European Parliament has defended equality, freedom, and solidarity, and it brings a scathing rebuttal to those and these destructive attempts. The heart of democracy beats here in Strasbourg and has for 70 years. So this is an anniversary that I think is also an opportunity for us to look towards the future. In the immediate future, we will have legislative files to address that are of great importance. First and foremost, Fit for 55, as well as for the reform of the Schengen area that is so invaluable to our citizens, as well as conquering our sovereignty, our energy, digital, technological, and strategic sovereignty by implementing the Versailles Agenda. Now, this is not an exhaustive list. It does show, however, that you are at the very heart of all of the challenges of our time, and the upcoming months will be very packed indeed. You can count on France. We will favor agreements and work for a stronger Europe with heightened solidarity and more sovereignty. Under the authority of the President of the Republic, you can count on us to work for that. Then we will have the European Parliament elections. This is a democratic exercise that we carry out every 5 years and gives structure to our union. Allow me to express a wish then that this will be an opportunity for us to have true debates where we can make sure that we have a Europe that is put to the service of our citizens. Honourable members, I should finish where I began, Strasbourg. Strasbourg is a symbol. It wears the marks of history. And at this time, where nationalism is on the rise and tries to rewrite the past, at this time when war has returned to the European continent, we must continue to recall precisely where Europe has come from, what it has suffered, what we have achieved, and what we will continue to achieve. In fact, it is the embodiment of the reconciliation of the European people, our city of Strasbourg, and it shows the strength of the Union and the strength of peace. Each month, Europe's actors all gather in Strasbourg, and in doing so, they pay a great tribute to our history and the very idea of Europe. Of course, there are practical questions, and my government is fully engaged to finding responses to them. But that must not turn us away from what is essential. At its core, Strasbourg is a very idea of Europe. This idea of Europe that has been built over the course of time in different areas of Europe. It is a Europe that has its past, but it also has its common future. Now, this Europe that is a symbol of its people and its territories, and it's the best remedy against any type of Europe that would be technocratic or disconnected. Now, through you, with all of the European citizens, because of this anniversary affects us all, it's an important one, I wanted to be here with you. The vitality of the European Parliament is the vitality of Europe itself, hence my desire to be here with you. Thank you.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Première.
Thank you very much, Madam Prime Minister.
Leaders who will have 2 minutes each, starting with the EPP group, Manfred Weber, to take the floor.
Madam President of the European Parliament, Commission President, dear Prime Ministers, 70 years, the European Parliament, our Parliament. I have to share with you my personal experience when I entered the first time into this institution, into this building. I fell immediately in love with this institution. I experienced a parliament where everybody counts. I was young, 31 years old, and I immediately got the trust of my colleagues to deal with an important legislation in the Libe file, in the Libe committee. And dear colleagues, when you understand that diversity, to have a colorful perspective about different ideas to solve problems, when you understand that this diversity is an advantage, then you fell in love with the European Parliament. And that is what I did when I entered here the first time. It is a very thin line here in this House to have, on the one hand, the party political position in mind, but also the majority position when you are defending the interests of this institution, the Chamber of the European citizens. It is not the party that is in the center here, not the Chancellor, not the Prime Minister, not even the Commission President. It is the bigger we, the bigger common interest, which finally is driving this institution. 70 years ago, we heard it, our colleagues gathered here in Strasbourg the first time. 7 years, you said it as Luxembourg Prime Minister, you said it, 7 years after the brutal Second World War had ended, unbelievable bravery, what they showed to us as Europeans. Today, it's now the right moment to celebrate this, a house of democracy, a place where all Europeans are represented, a place where our political ideas from the common good bring us together, a place where a multinational parliament with broad, real legislative power like no other in the world is present. My group, the EPP, has always believed that only a democratic, with a strong parliamentarian democracy, a democratic Europe is a Europe with has future. Since its first official meeting of my group in June '53, my group contributed to strengthening this House, to being ambitious in the leadership and the spirit of cooperation with other political forces, and together we were successful. But now we can go further, probably even much further. After the big success in 2014, when the first time this House, Jean-Claude Juncker, Martin Schulz, managed that the Commission President was based mainly on a majority here in this House, 2019 we made other experiences. Now we have to prepare 2024. And the idea behind is that people see that if they go to vote, they participate, they decide about the majorities, we come here together as elected people and then we decide the program and also the candidates for the next 5 years who has the power to do it. That people in Europe see the direct link between their participation in elections and then the outcome on political terms. That is what we want to guarantee. And don't get me wrong, as an EPP group leader and as a EPP president, I'm very proud that the first elected female president of the European Commission is an EPP candidate and the youngest member, president of the European Parliament, also a female candidate, is an EPP member. So we don't need a quota for this. We are very proud about this. When we speak about the strengthening of the democracy, I want to underline that we should not continue legislative proposals based on Article 122. Sounds technical, is very democratically important. And we have to strengthen still the European Parliament with the full right of legislative initiatives, with full rights on the budget, and with the full right of investigation in the interest of our citizens. So there is still a way in front of us. And I see the council members now in front of me. I would ask you, I really count on you, that council members are not doing these speeches here in this house, but also when they are at home, that we are really strong in developing even a stronger European Parliament. And at a time of democracy is now under attack, like it is the case in Ukraine, we have to be the beacon of democracy for Europe and the world. It's a great honor to serve in this institution. All the best for the upcoming 70 years. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Weber. I now invite Irache Garcia Perez to take the floor on behalf of the S&D Group. Irache, you have the floor.
Gracias, President.
Thank you very much, President. Ladies and gentlemen, this is a slightly unusual commemoration, we could say. When it comes to the Coal and Steel Union, its assembly, it wasn't really very similar to this Parliament. It had 78 members from 6 countries. They were predominantly male delegates from national parliaments. And I say male delegates because, in fact, there was only one woman. And now we have a female president of the European Commission. I just need to correct Manfred Weber. It's not that she's an EPP candidate. She is our president, the president of the European Commission, voted for and supported for by this chamber. The presidents represent institutions. They represent what we all defend here. At the time, the Assembly did not have a hemicycle, and they were lent a room by the Council of Europe. And just imagine, now we have this fantastic building. When we see the direct elections in 1979, there was an increase in competences for the Parliament. It was a complete transformation. But perhaps the biggest change is that today we are here representing 500 million European citizens from 27 countries. At the time, Europe was divided by the Iron Curtain. The first president of the Assembly, Paul-Henri Spaak, said that this community had not been born to be against anybody, but was born of freedom. There are more and more people who are able to benefit from this peace and prosperity that comes from democracy and the rule of law. And that was the case, although there are still countries that are missing. We have North Macedonia and Albania that are now beginning their negotiations, and there are others such as Ukraine and Moldova who will join us. It is important to deepen our democracy. It is the cornerstone. We do not have war between democracies. But things change. This is a living parliament. The Conference on the Future of Europe has given us an idea about the path that we should follow, what our citizens expect of us, how we, for example, reacting more rapidly to crises, better managing migration, more social policies, working more based on solidarity. What this means is a more political union. And what has not changed is our objective to have a closer union. And I would say to parliamentarians, we are representatives not of our own countries, but of the whole European community. At least that is how I feel. When people from Hungary and Poland ask us not to abandon them when it comes to the authoritarian backsliding of their governments, for example. Some people, some conservatives say that the EU has gone astray from its origins, but I do not think that is the case. Those original delegates from 1952 understood that European democracy does not weaken national democracy, it strengthens it in the same way that European citizenship strengthens national citizenship. So now it is up to us to maintain that spirit and adapt it to our times. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Irache. I now give the floor to the President of the Renew Europe Group, Stéphane Séjourné. À vous la parole.
Merci beaucoup, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam President. Madam Prime Minister, Messrs. Prime Ministers, this Parliament, as our European adventure, is a political miracle, an everyday political miracle in its 24 official languages, its 3 seats in Strasbourg, in Brussels, and in Luxembourg. In this chamber, hundreds of different national parties representing 27 different countries on various issues, the agricultural budget, various other issues. All of this was considered as acting before many other institutions, the vaccine, for example, energy prices, for example. This Parliament was the first to ask for a discussion and to adopt measures here. As of 2019, there are more than 18 million more people who went to cast their ballots. For 20 years now, in some countries, we're seeing more people turning out for European election votes than national election votes. The European Parliament, of course, understands more than its media sometimes, that this is where we're improving daily lives of our citizens. And it's for that very reason that we need to take that logical step right to the end, looking at the Conference on the Future of Europe that we initiated here in the European Parliament. More power for this Parliament means more efficiency for Europe. Give us the right of initiative, and you will be opening up solutions for asylum, immigration, economic affairs, issues that we're going to be dealing with before the end of our term of office this time around. Give us the budgetary power, and you'll have more investments in European sovereignty. Give us transnational lists, and you'll see a party that will be able to meet the challenges of the European Union.
Alors, je sais que
I'm aware that my group can count on the support of the Prime Ministers present here, and I would like to thank them. I'd also like to ask the other groups to convince their governments and Prime Ministers this European Parliament has been elected in 27 member states by universal suffrage as a co-legislator. This was started off as a dream, has become a reality. So I'm sure we can go even further for European democracy, for our citizens, so that 18 million more electors will be able to go and vote in 2024. Thank you, Madam President. Thank you for having organised this event, and happy birthday to the European Parliament.
Merci, Stéphane.
Thank you, Stéphane. Now I'll give the floor to Philippe Lambert for the Greens. 2 minutes.
Le 14 juillet 2009, je devenais...
On the 14th of July 2009, I came to the European Parliament for the first time as a member. I will never forget how proud I was to become one of the 736 representatives of the citizens to safeguard the interests of those 450 million citizens. And I still feel that same pride today as we celebrate the 70th anniversary of our Parliament. The European Union was the first attempt to create a transnational democracy. Now, it may still be imperfect and incomplete, but it is a prototype to be developed in a world which is increasingly fragmented and polarized. Together, we represent just 5.6% of the global population. Acting together, united in our diversity, is the condition sine qua non to strengthen our sovereignty. And when I say sovereignty, I mean our ability to act autonomously and make decisions to determine our future. As this is our objective, the European Parliament needs to deal with 3 challenges as representative of European citizens. The first is our ambition. We need to make sure that our planet remains habitable for humans. We need to reduce growing social injustices. We need to help people who have been forcibly displaced from their countries. We need to have international law which is based on rules rather than violence. We are facing existential challenges. There can be a real challenge to fall back on an idealized comfort of the past. If the EU wants to really make a future in the 21st century, we need to rediscover our sense of daring and our pioneering spirit. The second challenge is that of finding compromises and agreements. We seem to be surrounded by polarized societies, antagonistic blocs. But our Parliament must show the strength of dialogue, of finding solutions. This is the only way to find lasting solutions that will guarantee that we can all peaceably live together. We need to show that our diversity and our differences are not difficulties to be overcome, but assets to help build our future. The third challenge is to preserve our democracy and our rule of law. These are the foundations on which our union is built. Without them, we would not have peace nor prosperity, which are essential for the human dignity of all and for these to be sustainable. We saw our democracies darken in the last century as a prelude to the horrors of the Second World War. We know that this political regime, which Churchill described as the worst except all of the others, is fragile and mortal. It is both urgent and opportune for us to see these assaults to our democracy, to the rule of law within the heart of our union. The European Parliament must respond to those attacks on our democracies, whatever member state it might be or whatever political party they come from. We should never forget that democracies will die first due to a lack of confidence in their institutions and those who run their institutions. You're right, there are still some men, and it was a lot of men at the beginning. It is incumbent on all of us to try and restore that conference. Our guiding point should always be the general interest of all and not just of the few. I believe that we can take on these challenges, and I believe this is the best possible place to build our common future. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Philip. And I give the floor to Marco Zanni.
Grazie, Presidente.
Thank you, President. President von der Leyen, Prime Ministers, colleagues. 70 years have passed since the establishment of the Common Assembly of the ECSC in 1952. Europe was a very different place compared to what it is today. It was the aftermath of 2 world wars, and we were looking forward to peace and growth with great hope. At the time, the members of that assembly there were only 78 of them, and they were appointed by their national parliaments. And now there are more than 10 times as many members at some 705, and it's the European citizens who turn out to vote for us and to choose us to represent them. We are here to remind everyone of the values of democracy and the respect that we must have for our citizens that we represent here in this chamber. Now, the weight that we have as members of this parliament should be very much guided by the challenges that we face and of the aspirations that our citizens have in us and the institutions that we are part of. Democracy, in a context, of course, of strange nationalism, cultures that are similar but have their own identity, we must respect all of these differences and not find a way to smooth over all of the edges. We must try to find that common interest that we have in finding solutions to our challenges and problems, quick ones in these challenging times that we are currently experiencing, and go back, of course, to that spirit of 1952 that led to the establishment of this very institution. At the time, it was true that it was the ECSC that was the full voice of all of the member states to be able to express autonomy for the continent, resources and energy. These are still topical issues today. Now, this fact, I think, should remind us all, make us think, how is it that we have come to the point that we are at today? At the outset, we made a political decision to delegate to other institutions because at the time, industrializing in the area of industrialization, we knew that we were pushed to make these decisions, third countries with issues related to energy and some of the big changes that meant that today we have to come up with hasty solutions to a crisis that will be with us for some time, unfortunately. Our predecessors have much to teach us, and I believe and I hope that today will be an opportunity for us all to go back to the very roots of this project and to shift course to give us the future that we need. Now, going back to this institutions, I think that we need to follow the following lines to make sure that we fully realize them. We need that democracy to make sure that they are representing those millions of citizens. When we're able to achieve this, then I think we can state very clearly that democracy is indeed respected and represented here in this chamber. Thank you.
Grazie Marco. I give the floor now on behalf of the ECR group to Richard Legutko.
Madam President, Prime Ministers, 2 minutes of truth, of bitter truth. And the bitter truth is that the European Parliament has done a lot of damage in Europe. It has been sending a false message. It represents European demos. There isn't, and there won't be, any European demos. The Parliament infected Europe with shameless partisanship. And the infection became so contagious that it spread to other institutions, such as European Commission. The Parliament has abandoned the basic function of representing people. Instead, it has become a machine to implement the so-called European project, thus alienating millions of voters. The Parliament has become a political vehicle of the left to impose their monopoly with their fierce intolerance towards any dissenting view. No matter how many times you repeat the word diversity, diversity is becoming an extinct species in the European Union, and particularly in this chamber. The Parliament is a quasi-parliament because it rejects the essential principle of parliamentarism, namely accountability. The deputy, let me remind you, is elected by the voters and must be accountable to the voters that elected him. Not so in the European Union. The idea that, say, Spanish, German, French, etc., deputies accountable to their own national electorates can dictate something to, shall we say, a Hungarian society or any other society to which they cannot be held accountable and which cannot take them to task is simply preposterous. Call it what you will, but democracy it is not. To sum up, the Parliament represents the demos that does not exist, works for the project that ignores reality and law, shuns accountability, turns its back on millions of people, and serves the interest of one political orientation. And this is just the tip of the iceberg. Having said that, ladies and gentlemen, I rest my case.
Professor Legutko, with your 2 minutes, you have indeed proven that pluralism and diversity and democracy actually exists in this House. I give the floor now to Madame Aubry on behalf of the Left Group.
Merci, Madame.
Thank you very much, Madam President of the Commission, ladies and gentlemen, Prime Ministers. Today we are celebrating the anniversary of the creation of the European Parliament, but we've seen its history today, which reveals the path that still has to be completed before we've achieved genuine democracy in the European institutions. And when I hear my colleague, Mr. Legutko, obviously there is a long road still to pursue. I see he's left the chamber. He doesn't want to stay to hear about what's going on. A symptomatic aspect of this, maybe you're not fully aware, ladies and gentlemen, but these initial speeches by the Prime Ministers were initially going to be the only speeches here, and the group leaders were not going to be able to take the floor. It would have left a debate in a very restricted fashion, so I think extending the debate to the group leaders was a good idea. Now, looking at the history of the European Parliament, and the birth of this European Parliament, we saw that at the start there was no universal suffrage at the time. It took 27 years before the first MEPs were actually directly elected by the citizens themselves. 27 years to wait to achieve what is deemed to be the most evident political basic thing. How long are we going to have to wait now before the MEPs will finally have the right to initiate legislation? How many decades will it take before our Parliament has decision-making powers on all of the legal texts adopted by the Union? And maybe to act more against people who are trying to avoid paying tax evasion, and we've seen that Luxembourg is at the heart of this. How many years before the political deals aren't going to be talked about and decided on behind closed doors and heads of state and governments assume their political decisions? How many years before European citizens' initiatives and referendums be binding and that the Commission be forced to take action? Europe is the only true democracy around the world. We know that it's the citizens who represent democracy. Until all that's achieved, we won't have achieved full democracy. I've heard you, Ms. Borne, Mr. Bettel, Mr. de Croo, you're saying that democracy has to be bolstered. I've heard what you've said. But Ms. Borne, you were talking about democracy after what we've seen in France. Article 4953, we know that that is not going to happen in the European Parliament. How can you come here in Strasbourg and claim that you are a big Democrat when you haven't been able to do democratic bidding in Paris? We see that the conclusion of the Conference on the Future of Europe was very clear on these issues. Citizens don't want a Europe that is based on markets and competition, where the richest win the way, and where European leaders will finally have to look at redrafting the treaties fundamentally, and that's something that we expect and people out there expect too.
On that note, distinguished guests, fellow Europeans, I would like to invite you to stand for the anthem of the European Union.
La joie qui vous
Thank you very much, dear colleagues. The sitting will be now suspended for a few minutes and we will resume with the votes right afterwards.